Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Govern. Today we're going to be talking about Governor Inslee's mandates, his threats of firing workers, and how that may threaten the power grid in Washington state. Okay, as always, we are going to be talking about Washington State Governor Inslee because he seems to continuously do things that put him in the news. So that just makes it more interesting, and we have no choice because of the random changing nature of all of his rules and regulations and how those tend to affect our daily lives. Now, just as a trigger warning for anybody watching, as usual, we want to make sure we let you know that nothing that we say today has been approved by Governor Inslee or his Ministry of COVID Compliance. So if you only want to listen to things that Governor Inslee approves, you're going to want to stop watching this video right now. Now, the reason why Inslee ends up being in the news so much is because he continuously has this 18-month window of never-ending state of emergency and randomly changing issues and mandates and rules that he wants to impose on the state of Washington. Now, he's not alone in this. Other governors like Newsom and Brown and Whitmer and others around the country have seemed to be marching in lockstep with various versions of essentially the same methodology, just there's no legislature, they don't matter, and they're just simply going ahead with these rules that many question the constitutionality, many question whether they're even rational, many question the sanity of the governor for pushing them in the first place. And nevertheless, we're in the middle of this kind of endless pandemic that's never going to end. And one of the biggest diseases and viruses that we're having to deal with in the state is really this government staff infection, and it really starts at the top with Governor Inslee himself. And this endless disease that keeps spreading around with terrible policies, horrible outcomes. It doesn't matter what they claim their intentions are, the outcomes are not good, and it's really causing a lot of harm. And of course, one of the most recent ones has been Inslee's threat to all state workers, and essentially this has trickled down to the city workers in Seattle and King County and many municipalities around Washington state, where if they don't get the vaccine, that's a mandated vaccine requirement, that they're going to be fired, they're going to lose their job. And it's not just that they're going to be fired and lose their job, but these people are also going to lose, in theory, their retirement and their ability to get unemployment if they are fired. I mean, it's this really harsh, draconian threat that has come from the governor's office, a threat that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago, and really under any circumstances, and yet that seems to be what Governor Inslee's primary policy has been in Washington state now. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, if you don't work in the government and you've had bad experiences with them, who cares if they're fired? And that's probably true when you're talking about a place like Evergreen State College. If you were to fire the staff and the teachers at Evergreen State College, most of the state wouldn't know, and in fact, the state would be better off for it, and there might even be celebrations in the street. It's not like this is an institution that provides any value, and in fact, they do great harm. So firing them may not be that big of a deal. But of course, compliance and obedience by the Evergreen State College staff is almost universal, and so Inslee doesn't have to worry about firing them, and so that's not really what we're talking about. What we're really talking about are workers that actually state workers that do good things or do things that actually impact the lives of everyday, ordinary Washingtonians. Again, we may not be talking about, people may not be sad if somebody gets laid off the department or gets fired from labor and industries because they've been harassing people throughout this whole COVID pandemic. We might not be that concerned about Department of Ecology because most of the time they're not doing their job anyway, and they seem to be willing to look the other way, as we've reported in the past, on toxic waste piles in their front yard. So what kind of job are they doing? If they get fired, do we really care? Well, here's an example, the ferry system in Washington state. Now, if you are ever on the ferry or you plan to use the ferry, you'll know that the people who work there are keeping the ferry running. If they aren't going to be keeping the engine running, if they aren't going to be running the ferries will not work. And if you live in the islands, and there's quite a few of them in Puget Sound, that kind of their lifeline is on these ferry systems. When the ferry workers say they're going to have a problem and they're not going to be able to run the ferry system if he fires those who don't want the mandated jab, now we have something that's actually an issue. There's quite a few ferries in Washington state. And when you look, especially in the islands now, the ferry workers have specifically come out and said that they're going to have vaccine mandate protests. And those have started. They started several weeks ago. And that's why you're seeing already that there's a number of ferries that aren't running. They're running at partial capacity. People who are trying to either go as tourism or as commuters on these ferries are not able to get on, or they're delayed, or there's a lot of disruption, and that's going on because of this protest. protests, because even though the ferry workers are represented by WFC, which is one of the public sector unions in the state, and the WFC is largely bought off by the governor's office anyway, and so they easily caved, worked out some kind of deal where they got a few more kickbacks from the governor, and that didn't satisfy many of these workers who are in the ferry system, and so they've decided that they're going to start, part of their protest is they're going to show what it's going to be like if the governor actually goes through and fires them. Particularly, there seems to be a high concentration of workers who are concerned about this that work in the maintenance and the engineering portions of the ferry system, not so much the guys just pulling the rope across in the front. But nevertheless, that's a pretty serious disruption and just an indication of what you potentially are facing. And that's not so much the point of the story. I wanted to talk about something that's not getting a lot of attention, which is the line workers and the state employees that work in one department or another. They have several of them, Seattle City Light and some other government entities, the PUDs, that run the power grid in Washington State. These people do real work. This is actually something we need. And people may not realize this, but there's a lot of work that goes into keeping up the power grid. And there's a high level of skill involved in making sure that it's still running. That's true whether you're out there working on the lines, the power lines, or whether you're working at the dams. And the dams are run by Bonneville Power, which is a federally controlled entity that provides power to 5 different states out of the hydro power system. But all the cities, most of the jurisdictions in Washington State also buy power through BPA, and BPA is under similar mandates now. Similar threats that have come down from the federal government. And the feds may cave, we don't know, but Governor Inslee seems to be moving full speed ahead. And despite what people might think, if you live in the city of Seattle, it might surprise you to know, particularly in the era of Common Core education, that the lights just don't turn on by themselves. They actually require a power grid to run them. It's a beautiful city when you see it at night. Seattle is beautiful if you ignore the homeless camps downtown. And when you look at their own website and Seattle City Light and figure out where does this power come from, 84% of it is coming from hydro. And only in Washington State is hydro not considered a renewable resource, despite all the rain and the bounty that has provided us for almost a century now. But the reality is that if these workers, I've been told by people who run the union there and who are heavily engaged and involved in these negotiations, that Governor Inslee, if he sticks to his guns, he may get rid of about a third of the workers, could be as much as a third of the workers who work in these kind of critical infrastructure positions. And the problem is threatening to fire them is a stupid threat because they can get their same job, in fact, oftentimes paid more in other states. They can go to Louisiana, Texas, Idaho, Montana, even California. They can go any other place and get jobs doing this work. They're in high demand. It's a high-skilled position that takes years to learn how to do it without killing yourself. They can't just go and pull some homeless guy off the street or a Microsoft programmer or somebody out of Evergreen State College and expect that they're going to be up to speed on knowing how to keep up the grid in just a few minutes. And that really creates a situation where we are really run into a problem where we have a governor who's functioning and acting like a king, these random mandates that are clearly unconstitutional and mandated and against individual freedom and really stepping on people's toes in a way that the outcome, in addition to abusing those people and those workers, it's this idea that you're sticking it so hard that if they leave, for those who are actually doing real work in government, and it seems to be a higher percentage of those people who are concerned about this and are refusing to obey the governor, if they leave, then there's really a big impact in society. It's not going to be so fun when the lights go off in Seattle. You might be okay if you live rurally and you know how to have a generator or live a little bit more off the land, or you have some familiarity with getting by without power for a day or a week or even a month. But my prediction would be that in downtown Seattle, it would not be a great situation to have no power for weeks or months on end. And Governor Inslee seems to be pushing this state into a situation which, intentionally or not, that may be one of the outcomes. And I'm not sure that anybody's actually telling him what could really happen there. So does Inslee really care about how his policies are going to hurt us? We don't know. There's certainly no indication that he cares. In fact, he seems to be more focused on never admitting that he's wrong and just driving ahead regardless of the damage that his policies do. This is a concern. People who actually work in some of these jobs, not all of them. Again, if the governor fires his staff, nobody will care. But of course, that's not who he's going to fire. Now he's just threatening to fire the people that are actually keeping the power grid up in our state, or a high percentage of them. And he's threatening to fire a third of the teachers in the state. And he's threatening to fire a large percentage of the firemen and the police, in addition to the defund the police movement in Seattle. And that outcome won't be good for anybody. That's really what we're concerned about. So, while Governor Inslee may be sitting alone in his chair in the office, we have no idea what kind of advice he's getting because he usually just does what he's told. But this advice is terrible, and the outcome could be pretty significantly negative if he proceeds down the road that he seems to be moving down. So, again, well, nothing I have just said is approved by Governor Jay Inslee or his Ministry of COVID Compliance. It's still information that we believe that you need to know and be prepared for, and hopefully let the governor know that this is not a good policy. Even if you've got vaccinated, even if it doesn't apply to you, even if you don't work in state government, the outcome of this policy could be negative regardless of who you are and where you live. And I think it's important that we do our best to expose the truth and push back on really stupid ideas that come out of government. So if you want to learn more, please feel free to go to wethegovern.com. You can look in the description below. I'll have some more information there. And don't forget to share and subscribe this video. I basically get out with word of mouth. I get shadow banned a lot, and there's a lot of people that don't like what I'm saying, not just Governor Inslee. And it's helpful if you share this information with others. And remember, the one thing I tell people always at the end of every video, and it's as true today as it will be tomorrow: the future belongs to those who show up.